But Tactivate, I think I mentioned earlier, again, it's an organization I run at the intersection of special operations, entrepreneurship. We launch companies in the States using tactics and strategies from disaster response and special operations community to launch companies really quickly, and then we take an entrepreneurial approach to disaster response. We've been in Puerto Rico roughly, like 7 months now. Typically our deployments are 2 to 3 weeks, so this has been a bit different. But I was going to go through and kind of give you guys a test case, a kind of a high overarching view of what expeditionary entrepreneurship is and how it plays out and kind of what's been going on in Puerto Rico. So Panama, 2010, tons of flooding. There's all these indigenous villages where people are still legitimately like paddling around in dugout canoes. No one was doing anything. The government knew about it. There's no standing military in Panama, but there's a maritime police force. I didn't really know this was a libertarian conference. Now that I know that, this is actually kind of relevant. Not libertarian, sorry. Getting yelled at back there. But there's, these guys just mentioned there's a shifting in values, and people really want to get involved and really want to help. And the whole world of aid is changing really rapidly. And in all these environments that we drop into, it's typically, as Jaime was talking about, like the doers that people don't really see, that aren't in the newspapers or aren't in the magazines, who are the locals who've got the most incredible networks, invested interest, and connections to get things done. So we drop in and we put local organizations together with a maritime police unit who might say, hey, we've got this 30-foot boat, but we can't fund gas. So we'll go to a Dutch investment group who's operating in the remote area and say, hey, you pay for gas. We'll go to the Red Cross and basically steal supplies, and then we can kind of put together a relief operation, and that's how things get done, right? So government's kind of playing a role because the maritime police work for the government, sort of, right? All these crazy international groups are kind of coming together, and you're getting a lot done. I think we delivered like 10,000 pounds of food and non-food items over a couple-week period there. Philippines got totally smacked. Typhoon Haiyan, an area in Tacloban just got totally eradicated. It was a total mess. The UN was running the operation. And just like you guys all saw in Puerto Rico, when government gets involved, FEMA, UN, or otherwise, it's difficult to navigate. And it's typically informal initiatives that get a lot done, which is not to say the government doesn't have a role and you can't play with them. But in this case, we would drop in, and there's a great NGO called Team Rubicon, which is a veteran disaster response organization that we do a lot of work with and support. And we found the guy in Manila who runs the privatized 911 system. And we found one of the top entrepreneurs in the Philippines who had this huge network of warehouses that were sort of semi-intact. And with that consortium of people, we were able to stand up massive aid distribution, build field hospitals, all that kind of stuff. This is just us going to work in the Philippines. Same thing happened in Puerto Rico. You drop in, and relief, the idea of expeditionary entrepreneurship is not about profiteering. It's about applying the idea, the entrepreneurial modality, to kind of solution engineering. You drop into a foreign country, you don't understand the culture, you don't speak the language, you don't know what the power brokers are, you don't understand the political situation. You essentially have to start a company in 24 hours to save lives, build a communications network, build a field hospital, what have you. So you have to, just like in entrepreneurship, and you're starting a small company and you've got to compete with the big companies, or there's always a threat in every direction, you've got to assess that and you've got to mitigate for that in these environments. So we drop in, and people don't really understand who we are. We stay very unaffiliated, and that confuses a lot of folks, but it also enables us to get things done. So we can go out and we can find the folks, like Jaime was mentioned, the Gustavos, the young entrepreneurs, the young college alumni who are back down there, the culinary folks, the artists, all these people who have incredible networks who really want to help and who know the island, who have cars, but don't necessarily understand about relief, or don't necessarily understand how to interface with FEMA, because quite frankly, no one really does. And then there's huge military resources. And when you put all of these things together, you build true capacity. So that's kind of what we did. This was a group, I talked about what we did in Puerto Rico. One of the first kind of tangible projects was a communications solution to get these small remote markets back online, so the local entrepreneurs could start selling food to the community and be a kind of a supplier for the acute need for food and water, as opposed to being reliant on international aid. So in this picture you have, this guy is I call him this Santa Claus of SATCOM, because I can be in any island anywhere in the world, and I call him, and a SATCOM solution just drops out of the sky. Luis is the CIO of Puerto Rico. These guys in the middle have a non-for-profit or for-profit religious-based communications company who had tech. Gustavo is actually the kid that Jaime talked about, and then these folks are with the Office of Family Services. We just put all these folks together, and we kind of compiled, this group that we needed, and then we were able to go in and, through FEMA or through DoD and secure, air support or anything else we needed to kind of get this job done. And to Dale's point, the guy that spoke, I forget, the Viper guy, security, yeah, these guys. I saw the video, I was like, what the heck is this, a militia? And then there's so much truth in what he was saying. Whether it's Puerto Rico or Haiti or Texas, you can just show up. You literally can just show up. And if you look like you know what you're doing, or if you're there with good intention, a lot of people call it disaster tourism. You can't just go if you don't know what you're doing. But if you are comfortable, you have some training, you know what you're doing medically, you know about comms, you know about something, you can just walk in the front door or walk into the flood area and you can start helping, right? And people don't really realize that. And this, what you can get done, and that's kind of an entrepreneurial approach. Does that make sense? You guys tracking on that? How people think, well, if I don't work for FEMA, or if I'm not with the fire department, or if I'm not with the military, I can't help. And that's totally bogus, right? You don't have to be an NGO. You can just kind of get cranking. So these are the satellite solutions that we were installing throughout the island. Tiny little thing. That's all they need to be connected. That's a huge supermarket that a week and a half, 2 weeks after the storm, you walk in there and it was like a Twilight Zone because the aisles were completely stocked, the music was playing, and there's like an 80-year-old woman pushing this cart, and like grabbing all this stuff off the shelf. And I thought I've been watching the news and there's no food and everyone's dying. So put these in all over the place. Again, this is the CIO. So people, there's a lot of negative talk about the government and the political situation in Puerto Rico. In disaster response and kind of economic stability, emergency response scenarios, you can't ever focus on the negative. It's very easy to blame FEMA, the Puerto Rican government, the NGOs. It doesn't get you anywhere. Like, you can always do things better and you can always be learning, but you have to kind of forcefully see the benefit that everyone can bring to the table, and you've got to capitalize on it, and you've got to compile those resources. So we found that the Puerto Rican Innovation Technology Services Office within the Puerto Rican government was super helpful, and they kind of provided top cover to enable us to get a lot done. Foundation for Puerto Rico, they spoke earlier. Again, kind of a de facto, an organization that had no experience with disaster response, but because of what was happening, they became a base of operations, and all these NGOs and entrepreneurs and government agencies were coming through there. And we brought in the guy sitting in the chair here. It was Special Forces. They were running the PSYOPs unit, but what they were doing is basically going out in Puerto Rico and setting up guerrilla radio stations, because before there was any kind of communications, these guys were broadcasting through these setups they have in their Hummers to kind of broadcast to cell phones that, hey, food drop's coming tomorrow, or hey, water is coming, or whatever. So very useful guys with a lot of capacity that you can put to use. So we introduced those type of folks to the Foundation for Puerto Rico. This is the kind of stuff we're doing. We're dropping in like Castañar and Barranquitas and Orocovis, all these kind of more remote regions that hadn't been helped. And like this individual here had been paying out of pocket for, I don't know how many months it was at this point, to keep his staff on, to keep his doors open. And it was, again, still a cashless society. He couldn't take EBT. And by simply putting this very simple system on his roof, this man was now back in business, providing a critical resource to his community and getting his community less dependent, right? And we say this term a lot. What's really important to us is whole community readiness. And what that means is, within every community, even in Haiti, which has absolutely nothing, folks are super creative and have an immense amount of resources locally to solve their own problems. And aid, in general, is exceedingly detrimental and very top-down. And that's changing. All the people within aid are starting to realize that. They're starting to take ownership of that, when you can't just drop these preconceived notions and these operating systems into a Philippines, a Haiti, a Texas, wherever you, and expect them to work. They have to be incredibly culturally nuanced, and you have to be able to identify, support, activate, and amplify local resources, like this guy. This is just, this was out in Culebra, where this is like the first time people could actually buy stuff with EBT at their market. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm just blasting through a bunch of this here. These are some of the areas that we lit up with these SATCOM terminals. And again, I think to date, I can't give you a specific number because we did not get like the data in a way we needed it from PREPA and from Evertech. But I think conservatively, we've had $5 or $6 million of transactions go through these local systems, which is pretty cool for a $33,000 cash outlay in equipment, right? That's kind of a force multiplication output. If you spend $33,000 and installing 13 units, and that can lead to $6 million cash injection to the local economy while they're supplying goods that they're being dependent on for external aid to come in, which has previously undercut the market. You see how it's kind of a negative cycle, right? If you get rid of that cycle and you let the locals take care of the problem, hey. So what we were working on before we got kind of pulled out to do some policy stuff is entrepreneurship is about being connected, right, and connecting with people. And the biggest thing in all these environments is siloing. So State Department, FEMA, military, local doers, entrepreneurs, artists, chefs, whatever. The Puerto Rican government and the federal government, everyone is completely siloed, and no one really talks, right? Which is a huge problem. They're aware of it, but there's the saying, it's easier to start from new than it is to rehab, and all the systems now are being rehabbed. But until that happens, we kind of have to build a system outside of the system that is capable of operating on its own and within what it currently exists, right? So again, you have to celebrate the positive everything. So we tend to create these team houses, these areas where people can come, where nice, calm area where we intentionally invite military, local entrepreneurs. This is during the acute response phase. FEMA, and people start realizing, oh, you're the truck guy, you're the generator guy, you're the helicopter guy, and they start kind of forming informal relationships, which I think we can all agree that's how things get done, right? So when that phase is over, what we want to do in Puerto Rico is basically create, in the private sector, what we do is we create these hybrid environments. We've done it in climbing gyms, we've built, bars, where we socially engineer and kind of experiment with how can we inject this idea of awareness, of readiness, of whole community readiness through mediums that people are accustomed to. So we had an outdoor survival training bar in Miami. People in Miami drink. So they showed up to the bar, but we were teaching them about how to use a tourniquet, how to set up solar panels, how to grow herbs, like all these really subtle things. And in Puerto Rico, we were going to build, and might still do this, kind of an off-grid community in an expeditionary manner. So drop in 2 weeks, build this whole thing, totally off-grid, passive water catchment, solar, and have it be a fun, comfortable place that can attract these Bitcoin folks that are running around, and the solar engineers, and the government folks, and the military folks, because it's a cool, fun, funky place. But really what's going on is there's workshops on how to set up solar panels, how to grow food, how to set up off-grid comms. So you can take the information from this type of area and you can bring it back to your community so people can kind of start arming their respective communities for what's going to start happening in June again when the storms come around. What isn't happening in Puerto Rico, and people are talking about it, but it has not happened at any scale whatsoever, is proactive readiness. Right? So Puerto Rico is going to be in the same exact position when they get nailed again. Right? Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it's a very reactionary kind of paradigm, right? Where I don't know what's really transpired, what's going to empower Puerto Rico to be able to take care of itself when, God forbid, if this happens again. And that's what we're kind of working on. So again, the idea is like co-working, physicality, skills training, vibrancy, entertainment, all rolled into one. Just some tools we use. I think I'm done, 1 minute. We use the term force multiplication a lot in our private sector stuff and disaster response. When you've got no resources, this is like the marketing funnel. It's typically flipped up. You throw a bunch of stuff into the funnel, you expect an output. You flip that upside down because you've got no resources. You need to have what is the maximum amount of output you can have with the most de minimis amount of input. So who can you work with, whether it's the Gustavo Diaz's or the Jaime's or whomever, in a space that can absolutely massively amplify your project with zero resources. And concentric rings, something we picked up at survival school. When you do something, when you put in a generator or you put in a solar panel or you put someone in a business locally, how is that going to affect and amplify the community at large? And how is that going to empower other folks? How to do 10 minutes? Boom. Good. Cool.